Hello and welcome to the show. I am Joe Tophat. Scooby Doo on Zombie Island was one of the best Scooby Doo movies ever made. This is partially due to the fact that the monsters they encountered were real. Although it wasn't the first time Scooby and the gang encountered real monsters, it was the first to do it in a serious way. These weren't the Boo Brothers or that cute ghost from a pup named Scooby Doo. These were two ladies named Simone and Lena, who became werecats by praying to their god in order to avenge their people after they were murdered by the pirate Morgan Moonscar. As a result of their vengeance, Simone and Lena are now cursed. They must feed on people they lured to their island to stay alive. The zombies, who we thought were the bad guys, are actually their victims. A little dark for a Scooby-Doo movie, but that's what makes it work. The story ended so well, there didn't seem to be a need for a sequel. But since we live in a world today where every movie needs one, we get Scooby-Doo, Return to Zombie Island. Is it as good as the original, or is it a cheap cash grab? Let's find out. The movie starts off with Fred dreaming about all the times the gang unmasked villains with their mystery machine. It's a nice callback to previous ghosts they encountered. He wakes up in a diner only to realize that they sold their van and promised the sheriff from Curse of the 13th Ghost that they'll never solve another mystery. For the record, I haven't seen Curse of the 13th Ghost at the making of this video. It sounds bad, but I can't give the full review without seeing it myself. Anyway, the sheriff isn't the only one making the game promise something. Shaggy and Scooby are sick of being dragged along to solve a mystery, and they make Fred, Daphne, and Velma promise they won't try to solve any. This has to be my favorite part of the movie. All Shaggy and Scooby ever want to do is hang out and eat. Instead, they always get dragged off to some haunted house where they are used as bait to trap a ghost. It's actually nice to see them put the others in their place. You know, since Shaggy and Scooby are always the bait, does that mean that Fred, Velma, and Daphne are the real cowards? They learned from watching Elvira that the gang won a tropical island trip where they will be staying at the Moonstar Hotel. Although they find it suspicious that the prize was so exact in detail, Fred and the girls try not to question it. Throughout the first part of the movie, they find a lot of things suspicious, like how the island looks like Zombie or Moonscar Island. The ferry captain and the villagers telling them to leave, the palm trees are fake, the tire in the van they were in getting slashed, the hotel being one letter away from Moonscar, Fred seeing what looks like the mystery machine, the torn pages from the hotel sign-in book, and how the hotel workers look like major characters from Zombie Island. Yet Fred, Daphne, and Velma do their best to ignore it. Once again, I have to give the movie credit. It's actually kind of nice to see Fred, Daphne, and Velma go against their natural instinct to solve a mystery in order to keep their promise to Shaggy and Scooby. I also like how they don't seem to know how to do something simple like make small talk. If I have any complaints so far, it's how they presented the events from the original movie. According to Daphne, she worked as a reporter for a school project. It was during this report that she had to find a real haunted house. This contradicts what happened. In the original movie, the gang had split up because they were sick of having to deal with a monster who was a guy in a mask. Daphne was a reporter with her own major show, something a student can't claim. Fred was her producer, Velma owned a mystery bookstore, and Shaggy and Scooby were often unemployed. The gang seemed like they were supposed to be in their mid to late 20s at the time of Zombie Island. Admittedly, people that age can be in college, but none of them acted like they were. They were adults with their own careers. Why say the reporting job was a school project when it obviously wasn't? Anyway, Shaggy and Scooby eventually released the gang from their promise when the zombies started to pop up. It turns out that the zombies are all actors, and the hotel manager is a movie director named Alan Smithy. The moniker directors used to use to disassociate themselves from a movie. Smithy had set the whole thing up just so he could make a found footage movie with the gang. Was he thinking about paying them or having them sign a release? 'Cause I think it's illegal to not do either one. The gang agreed to be part of the movie. They run into a few problems, like Fred wanting to do his own stunts instead of using a stunt double, and Scooby not being a great actor. The biggest problem they ran into are the werecats. You see, Smithy may have been behind the zombies, but not the werecats. To wrap things up, the werecats were the ferry captain and the two villagers from earlier. They were trying to find Morgan Moonscar's treasure. After their arrest, the cats dig up the treasure, which is laid claim by the director, who decides to retire. The gang has the sheriff lift their promise to not solve any more mysteries, and they go back to normal. Well, there was a fourth werecat involved, but we never learn if it was real or a guy in a mask. Scooby Doo Return to Zombie Island has its moments, but overall is inferior to the original. What made Scooby Doo on Zombie Island work is that the gang finally confronted real monsters. It may not have been the first time real monsters were in a Scooby Doo cartoon, but it was the first time with the original gang, minus Scrappy. The story was also surprisingly dark for a Scooby Doo movie. Scooby Doo Return to Zombie Island just feels like they were trying to cash in on nostalgia. There is one thing that bothers me about this movie more than it being a cash grab. The big run on gag in this movie was that Velma has this blog that the others don't read. In this blog, she talks about their past mysteries. There is a section called Unsolved Mysteries. It includes the reluctant werewolf and Zombie Island. There was no mystery in Reluctant Werewolf. Shaggy turned into a werewolf and had to win a race full of monsters so he could change back. Zombie Island wasn't an unsolved mystery. Why put either case in that category? Although I haven't seen Curse of the 13th Ghost, I am aware that Velma provided a logical explanation for the events of the 13 Ghosts of Scooby Doo. It worried me that they were going to do the same thing with Zombie Island. To the movie's credit, the other characters tell Velma that the monsters were real, but she refuses to believe it. In the end, she claims that the events of the original movie were hallucinations caused by swamp gas. The others decide to let her live in her delusion. Why is Velma having a hard time accepting that the monsters are real? In Zombie Island, both she and Fred were skeptics, but she was willing to admit that there were no wires being used when she started to float. Between the two, I'd say Fred was the bigger skeptic. He kept insisting that the zombie was a guy in a mask, until he pulled his head off. Fred did try to say it was animatronic, but you could tell by the tone of his voice he didn't really believe that. In the end, he was forced to admit the zombies were real. Also, there was a police detective with them on the island. He saw everything they saw, from the zombies, the werecats, and the use of the voodoo dolls. Was he also suffering from hallucinations caused by swamp gas? Then there was the reason why the detective was on the island in the first place. He was investigating why people disappeared once they got there. What makes Zombie Island the darkest Scooby Doo movie ever is that people were killed. For centuries, Simone and Lena murdered innocent people to sustain their lives. You could make the case that Morgan Moonscar and his men got what they deserved, but most of these people never did anything wrong. Seeing the different clothes the zombies wear, they were just Civil War soldiers looking for refuge, or tourists on vacation. They all most likely had friends and family who never knew what happened to them. Since a police detective was sent, there are obviously records of these poor people gone missing. How does swamp gas explain that? At one point, Simone and Lena almost turned Shaggy and Scooby into zombies. Two of her best friends were almost killed, and Velma is willing to act like it never happened. I find it pretty offensive that Velma casually ignores the deaths of hundreds of people just so she can cling to the delusion that every case they were involved in was just a guy in a mask. While I'm glad that they acknowledged that in the original movie the monsters were real, it still worries me that all future Scooby-Doo movies are going to try to act like all the times they encountered real ghosts and monsters were just hallucinations. My advice, stick with Zombie Island and ignore the sequel. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments section what you guys think, and don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later.